Hello and good morning. Thanks for joining us here on this Wednesday. I'm Ryan Kalei-Suji, joined by Yanji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. And this morning, Yanji, we're catching up with someone that we actually have not featured on this show yet.
Yeah, we've been on 2 years and we haven't had the pleasure of having this guest, but she's been making a lot of news as of late. And so we've asked her to join us this morning. Joining us is former Attorney General and now U.S. Attorney Clare Connors with the Department of Justice in Hawaii. She joins us live this morning to give us some perspective on some public corruption cases that have been unfolding. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you both. I'm delighted to join you.
So I want to start, of course, with the case unfolding at the state legislature. You held a press conference about 3 weeks ago when all of this came to light. We know that our audience has, varying degrees of knowledge about this case. Both former lawmakers have pleaded guilty at this point. But what can you tell us, just sort of broad strokes, about this case, what they're guilty of, and also what happens next?
Sure, I'd be happy to. As you said, we did have a public press conference on this at the time that the informations were filed charging two state legislators with honest services fraud. It's a specific federal statute. The federal government proceeds where Congress says we can proceed, and so we have jurisdiction in this case to look at these kinds of matters. These cases involve schemes to defraud the people of our state of Hawaii. And in this case, they involved legislative acts that these two legislators, one a House representative, the other a state senator, agreed to take in exchange for money. And this is an area of public integrity that federal government, state, local government, regulators, lawmakers are all interested in addressing. It's all hands on effort. But what this case specifically highlighted is the kinds of tools and investigative resources and types of procedures that the federal government can utilize in this space. So as you said, former state senator Kalani English and also former House Representative Ty Cullen entered pleas. They did so a few weeks ago, and they're presently scheduled for sentencing on July 5th for what we call honest services fraud.
And if you can take us back through that process of how long this investigation was going on, how long you folks have been working on this case. Of course, you just stepping into this role, but this was something that has been investigated for some time now. If you can take us through just the process of this, how all of it came to be.
Right. So it was a federal investigation that was pursued through the Federal Bureau of Investigations in our Honolulu office. And the charging documents reflect that the acts that were identified in these charging documents go back as far as 2014, 2015. And they involve interactions with persons who had interest in legislation and particular areas where they could profit if certain laws were put into place. And these two legislators were willing to take money in exchange for pushing forward legislation in one case, and then also killing legislation in a subsequent case. So the investigative process is reflective of what's in the charging documents in terms of the span and the course and the scope of it. And what we can talk about publicly is what's in those plea agreements, and then again, what will be also heard at issue before Judge Mulway when the sentencings take place.
Yunji's muted right now.
My apologies. Happens every time. What are those two individuals facing? How much prison time could they face?
Each of the statutes that or each of the charges, there's one charge for each of them, holds a maximum penalty of 20 years. But the process that takes place now, and the reason why the sentencing is put out until July, is because there's going to be a review by our United States Probation Office of the different factors and different considerations that would go into the judge's determination at that point in time. So what we know now is what the potential maximums are, but we won't know the full set of details that the court is considering until the time of sentencing.
When this story broke, there were, it was shockwaves. It sent shockwaves throughout the state, not only just on the political level and the spectrum of those who are involved in politics, but just the general community of just fraud that's happened at this level with two public officials and an official who had a leadership capacity during his time in the Senate. What do you think this case really proves, or the message that it sends, I guess, to other lawmakers about this process and about donations that continue to be scrutinized during yet another campaign season that's upon us? What sort of message do you think that this case can help to deliver, I guess, overall to not only politicians, but to the community at large?
That's a great question. So one of the most important things that I think it has done is demonstrated that this is a all hands on deck effort. The federal government, the state government, local government, regulators, lawmakers, everyone is concerned about integrity in government. And that's a very positive thing. And it's something that I've experienced as well, being both in state government and in federal government. I know the legislature is working very hard right now to get a myriad of policies enacted into law. And the fact that I've observed now some very important discussions happening about consolidating state law enforcement, creating special investigative prosecution units, possibly changing Hawaii law to match some of the laws that are available on the federal level. I can't comment on them in this position, but I think they're all worth exploring, and those are really important conversations to be having. This case is one example. Public officials need to act with integrity, whether they're elected, whether they're not elected, whether they're on the federal level. We've prosecuted federal public officials as well. Most recently, a couple weeks ago, a federal employee who mishandled classified information. Local level public officials, the DPP cases that our office brought, and which are going through the process now, involve not just city and county permitting and planning employees, but also a private person, the person who paid the bribes to the county officials. So it's a very broad scope that we are looking at when we want to ensure that there is integrity in government. I think everyone who heard the president's speech yesterday might have heard that there's going to be a chief prosecutor for pandemic fraud. That's great, because anytime we have billions of dollars in federal aid moving through our state and our local governments, you're going to have fraud. And it's going to be very important for all levels of government, state, federal, local, to prioritize looking at how that money is being spent and ensuring that we're doing our best to hold people accountable when they don't spend it the way it's intended to be spent.
Yeah, can you walk us through a little bit of what that will actually look like on the ground now that the president has made that statement? How is that going to be enforced, and what does that mean for your office when it comes to all that pandemic money that did indeed flow through our state?
Right. So for our office and for the Department of Justice, it's going to be a clear priority. Public corruption, fraud are clear priorities for the Department of Justice, and it's reflected in the types of charging documents our office has routinely and regularly brought. The good thing about it is it's going to provide a great opportunity for collaboration with our state partners. The State Attorney General Office, as I know, has a complex litigation fraud and compliance unit that was set up a few years ago with the approval of the governor, with the approval of the legislature. I believe it's changing in iteration and form as the times and the needs require it to. But what it's going to allow the state to do is to take a look at some of the claims, reports, instances that people might see of where this money might not be used the way it's supposed to be used, and they can report it to the state. The state can then interface with the feds. We can collaborate. It can also help with the local reporting mechanisms. So it's going to provide a lot of collaboration because we all have our eyes open and our ears to the ground listening to what's happening and where we see these instances. But having a structure for collaboration is wonderful, and it's unique in our state, and it's something we're supporting.
I'm wondering if we can also go back and talk a little bit more about the DPP case and where that's at right now, because we know that that has also been something that many in the community have been upset about, just the process and how long it took, and knowing now that there were individuals involved that were involved in this sort of level of corruption. If you can give some context to that case and where things are now there.
Sure. So there were 5 defendants that were publicly charged, and some of them have entered pleas of guilt, and we're moving through the process now regarding those cases. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that this is the kind of case that really makes people step back and be upset, be concerned, but also they should be hopeful about the fact that there are government entities out there that are doing things about it, right? When we see something, we investigate it. When the evidence leads us to a place where we can prosecute it, we do so. And we do so using the tools that are available to us. So it should give people hope that government is looking out for how government is operating, and that we will take action when we see people doing things they shouldn't under the law.
You know, I think there's a similar reaction to the Kalani English and Cullen case when you think about just how blatant this was. This was not subtle at all. It was cash for changing legislation, and it seems that these lawmakers had sort of no fear of being caught when they're doing this, what feels like sort of out in the open. What do you tell the public? Because I think there is a feeling right now, especially given, I know you can't talk about person A in detail, but given what we know about this person and how prolific of a donor they were, they gave to a lot of individuals who didn't necessarily do political favors in the same way for them. But it makes a lot of people in Hawaii just throw their hands up at politics in general and say they're all corrupt. What do you say to that?
Again, I think people should be hopeful at one, the fact that this case happened, and the fact that we are moving through the process where we are prosecuting it, and this case is going to come to a point where there will be sentences that will be issued in July. The other important part is that you shouldn't, as a person in our public citizenry, think that this is how things should happen. You should get involved in what's going on in the legislature right now. There's a lot going on from what I can tell. And you should also report things when you see things. There's a great tool available to both the feds and the state and local entities. It's called the False Claims Act. And what it allows people who are members of the public to do, people who see things and have perhaps information about fraud, they can file a claim and become a relator, a part of a case, a fraud case, a case where there's been procurement fraud or some kind of fraud, and actually work alongside the government, state and federal government, to help clean up these kinds of acts. And the False Claims Act is an important tool. It incorporates the public. But even in the absence of that, False Claims Acts can be brought by the state and by the federal government. And we can do so if somebody reports fraud and misconduct to us. So people should take heart in the fact that there are systems in government in place to address this. As you might know from the two charging documents, the fact that there was a gift disclosure law and that both legislators had omitted the funds that they received as part of the scheme from that disclosure requirement became a part of our case. So it's an important part of the framework that's been set up by the state that plays into how we can address these kinds of issues in the different ways that they come to our attention.
I want to talk a little bit about that gift disclosure law because there have been some who have criticized the system and saying that it is still somewhat of an honor system and that things can easily be manipulated there. Do you think that there needs to be some sort of stricter, I guess, parameters on gifts that are given to legislators, how those are reported, and the follow-up that goes on with through that process? And overall, do you think that there should be any sort of changes to help to hold these legislators more accountable for the gifts that they receive while in office?
What I can say in my current position, without being able to comment directly on state law, is that the fact of the gift disclosure law, the fact that there was a requirement and that persons in public office, persons who were holding positions of trust, were required to fill those out truthfully and didn't, played into the full package that we were able to articulate in our charging documents. So the fact that those laws existed and that the public officials were under an obligation to be truthful in them all mattered when it came time for us to put our charging documents together. So they are important. What regulators are doing, what lawmakers are doing, go hand in hand with what prosecutors and law enforcement can do.
We like to bring an audience question. In this case, one of the questions is actually coming from a writer at the paper. This is Christine Donnelly. She writes the Kokua column. She says, could you speak a little bit more about the pandemic fraud in terms of investigations? Are you referring to the broad cyber fraud, as in unemployment and the PUA claims, or are you talking about the administration of these funds? In other words, corruption and how the money is doled out, or perhaps both? She hears from many readers who want assurances that limited funds are being dispensed fairly.
So I'll say both. Right. The UI and the PUA funds, those were ongoing concerns. I think I was publicly identified as a victim of that cybercrime myself. So it was very widespread. And it was something that the Complex Litigation Fraud and Compliance Unit in the AG's office was very involved in, and also in collaboration with the federal government. So that is something that is a good example of where those kinds of claims and those kinds of issues were being looked at and were being investigated collaboratively with state and federal entities. The second issue regarding the potential fraud, we all have that concern. Again, when you have billions of dollars that are coming to the states across the union and in our territories, you are going to have fraud. And we are going to have to be looking out for it, public members are going to have to be looking out for it. Government regulators are going to have to be looking out for it. And if we have a system for collaboration where we can use our resources collectively as state and federal entities to figure out the best way to investigate and proceed, then we're all going to be better off. So again, all hands on deck effort with not just law enforcement, but the public as well. So through the COCUA line, if things come to light or if people hear of things or themselves observe things, they should let the federal government, the state, know about it.
One of those fraud cases that made headlines, especially on the Big Island, concerned former lawmaker there, Stacey Higa. What can you tell us about that case? Because we know that that has been another example of, a public leader, someone who has been in the public eye, that is now under this type of investigation as well.
Right. That's another example of the federal government using the different types of federal statutes available to it to prosecute public corruption. So in Mr. Higa's case, he was sentenced, I believe, last week to 46 months. And you're right, it was for taking bribes so that he could get coronavirus grant money, but it was also for taking money from AmeriCorps. We have a lot of existing federal programs that aren't tied to this relief funding that also need to be expended in the way that they were intended to be. And what Mr. Higa did in that case was misuse AmeriCorps funds. And that was part of what he was brought to justice for and sentenced for last week. That's another great example, Ryan.
I doubt that you can say much on this, but I want to ask anyway, because a lot of people are wondering if the corruption case at the legislature ends with those two lawmakers, or are there other lawmakers that the government is looking at right now?
What I will say is that clearly this is a priority for the federal government, as I know it is for state and local as well. And the scopes of our investigation are broad. As I said, we look at federal, state, local, elected, non-elected public officials, and also private parties who are engaged in fraud, who are engaged in honest services corruption, right? Depriving our people and our state of honest services in these public positions. So we are very vigilant in this space, and we are committed to ensuring that when we see something, we will investigate and we will prosecute.
We know that you've just stepped into this new role, but prior to this, you were the Attorney General, and you were working directly and closely with the governor during the pandemic amidst all the changing regulations, with emergency proclamations being handed out, and how to enforce some of these rules that were popping up really just month by month, and as things continue to evolve during the pandemic. I'm wondering if you can take us back a few years, when the pandemic first hit, you're in that capacity, and explain what it was like in that role with so many things changing constantly, and having to adapt in the role that you served as Attorney General.
Right, that was quite a time to take us 2 years back. And I did hear the governor say it right yesterday. We didn't have a handbook. We didn't know exactly what this was going to look like from a science level or from really a public policy level. But we had a sense of what it was going to look like from a legal perspective. And that's where I think our office, the Department of the Attorney General, had an important role to play. What we could do is we could help frame the legal contours so that the policymakers, so the decision makers knew the bounds within which they could operate. So when we came to the point of having to put forth an emergency proclamation and set the contours of that for the governor to review, we looked at what the different implications for liberties and privileges and interests of our citizens would be. We looked at the case law. We tried to anticipate how these things would end up in court, and then to come to the policymakers, to the public health officials and everyone who was at the table, and there were a lot of people at the table. And we could say to them, this is what it looks like. This is what the implications or the consequences of this decision could be. And this is how it would fold or unfold in court. And this is how we anticipate these things happening. So that's a really important way that the Department of the Attorney General operated. We framed the legal issues, and that, I think, helped in a lot of different ways make the kinds of policies and to bring our state to where we are now.
You just spoke about how you are focused on rooting out corruption at every level. And in his press conference in the wake of the scandal at the Ledge, House Speaker Scott Saiki did say that, quote, "I would hope it's uncommon." There's some in the public who think that it's not. Do you think it is?
What I think is important is that we use all the resources available to us on the regulatory, lawmaking, and also law enforcement angles to bring to this issue. Whether it's common or not is a separate issue from what we do when we see it and how we approach it, right? So when we see corruption, all of us, what our obligations are. We need to report it, we need to investigate it, we need to prosecute it. And the facts will lead us to the appropriate resolution of any matter that comes to our attention.
We've obviously spent a lot of time talking about fraud and corruption here, and that was really the reason why we wanted to bring you on, was to talk about this case specifically. But as you enter into this new role of yours, is there any other area that you feel that the office that you oversee will really focus on? Some of the areas that maybe have been overlooked in the past, and other matters that are happening around our community that you would like to see addressed, and you would like to see those individuals prosecuted moving forward?
Yes, this has been a transition for me, but it's been a good one because I was previously a line prosecutor in this office. So foremost on our agenda is going to be continuing collaboration in the public corruption matters, which is a priority, but also in a lot of other matters. So violent crime, as we've seen, is a concern, and there's a lot that the Department of Justice can bring to this conversation. And we do so through Project Safe Neighborhoods and different initiatives that we collaborate with state and local law enforcement on. We will continue to prioritize that, and we will continue to put our resources there. Crimes against children are going to continue to be a priority of this office. We have laws that we can use when it comes to production of child pornography, when it comes to trafficking and exploitation, and we will collaborate through Internet Crimes Against Children, which is a great state-run but collaborative task force effort by all different levels of law enforcement, and other task forces that are out there to ensure that we are doing the best we can to protect our children. I also, again, want to emphasize the ability to use civil litigation, affirmative litigation, False Claims Act that I mentioned. That's a great opportunity for us to really ensure that our government and our state is operating with integrity. And those are important claims to bring on the federal and the state level. It's an affirmative civil justice system as opposed to the criminal justice system, but that's going to be a priority of our office as well, alongside the national security issues, which we are addressing day in, day out. We can't talk about those, but I have seen a lot of incredible work that is being done by our national security components to ensure that we're being kept safe.
Christine has a follow-up, and actually I'd like to ask this a little more broadly. She wants to know if there's a fraud reporting hotline for all types of pandemic-era fund that were perhaps misused. And then you did talk about citizens just getting involved. I think that, some people might be intimidated to call the U.S. Attorney's Office. What would you tell folks about how they start that conversation, who to call? Certainly not a 911 call, but there's got to be a way that they can get involved and not feel scared to call the authorities in this case.
Right, and that's a great point. You don't want to be afraid to report something, even if you think it's something that you've been involved in, but you're coming to a place where you think that there's something that has to be looked at more carefully. And two things I would suggest, and we'll have to post these on afterwards, but during the coronavirus relief expenditures, the AG's office did exactly that, and I believe Kokua did put that information on its website at one point in time. I don't have the exact numbers, I think, here now, but it's available at the Department of the Attorney General's website, where you go to report any kind of fraud, including pandemic fraud, but including things that you see that might be happening on the state, local, federal level that don't make sense. That can be used too, because we are interfaced and nexusing with the state as well, so they can certainly send anything our way when they see that it might not fit their jurisdiction, but it could fit ours. And secondly, the best thing to do is to go to the FBI Honolulu reporting office. So they have a specific line that I don't have available with me right now, but we definitely should make it available, because they are trained in how to unpack information that might be presented to them. So you don't have to have it all tied up in a bundle. It's just more important that if you think there is something going on, you have an avenue to provide that. And then, of course, we have a public line here as well, which we can post. I know our telephone number is 808-541-2850. But I would recommend those first two courses of action. If you're someone who has something to say, but you're not sure what it means, please take the opportunity to call AG's office or FBI Honolulu, or our office too.
As our time wraps up here, I did want to provide you an opportunity to present just some final thoughts about as we move forward. I think in general, when you look at the amount of different corruption cases that have been exposed over the past few years, going back to the Kealohas, DPP, now these lawmakers, I mean, there's just been a a lot that has happened in the community that, as Yanji said earlier, many people are just frustrated with, and they seemingly say, this is why I don't get involved in politics. This is maybe why I don't want to vote, because there just seems to be this corruption everywhere. What is your message to the community for those who are sensing this frustration and moving forward in this capacity that you now have? What would you like to do to ensure to help get that trust back to the community?
It's very important right now for people to understand that government is working and that there are mechanisms and modes for participation that will ensure that where concerns arise, there can be action that can be taken. The primary purpose behind the Department of Justice is to protect the community and also to vindicate the rights of the community. And that's something that this federal office is going to continue to do, and we're going to do it in whatever shape or form the matters arise and however we can best approach them, whether through criminal mechanisms or civil mechanisms. We are here to do that. So government is a strong set of institutions in our state. Does it mean that they do not continue to or must continue to police themselves and do better? No, we must. But there are mechanisms in place, and people should do what they can to avail themselves of them when they see something.
Okay. U.S. Attorney Clare Connors, thank you so much for spending time with us. We know that you're very busy, and we really do appreciate it.
Very happy. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you.
You. Great to hear from her, Ryan. And I really liked what she was saying just in trying to sort of reframe this case, that it is not necessarily something that you should throw your hands up with in frustration, but rather say, great, there is somebody who is watching out for our community and that there are consequences when things like this happen. Of course, we'll see sentencing happening, she said, in July for those two former lawmakers. Interesting to hear just about a little bit about that process. The judge now gets to review some circumstances of the case and decide what is appropriate. Of course, both lawmakers are facing decades in prison for their involvement in this case. And then she did talk about the DPP case going on and the case with Stacey Higa that you mentioned as well.
Yeah, really just affirming overall that while it does appear, and as many have spoken out even on this show through our comment section, the frustration of corruption here within our community, we're hearing from Clare Connors saying that there are mechanisms in place and really bodies of government that are looking for ways to root out this corruption. And the fact that this is brought to light also sets a precedence moving forward for other lawmakers. I mean, we see a number of bills that are now moving through the legislature that are directly linking to corruption and that are linked to campaign spending and other discussions that are happening that really could change the landscape of how campaigning happens in this state moving forward, and just how people are comfortable giving money to these types of as a donor to these types of political campaigns moving forward. And so there seems to be a lot more of checks and balances that will be being put into place and other mechanisms to help prevent this from moving forward. But great to hear from her in a conversation that we wanted to have for some time, but glad we were able to finally schedule it and make that conversation happen.
Yeah, and she did encourage you, of course, members of the public, if you see something, say something. We say that in so many different aspects of life, but this one is really important. And I think it could be kind of intimidating to figure out, okay, how am I going to call the U.S. attorney? But she did outline those mechanisms that are available, calling the FBI in Honolulu and just laying out the information that you have, that these are resources that are part of the public trust and that they are available to us, and that we need to break down those barriers. And if you feel like, you have some information, to share it. Interesting that she tied it back to the president's call yesterday, saying that he's going to be appointing a chief prosecutor when it comes to pandemic fraud. We did see billions of dollars flow through the country, and a lot of that ended up here in Hawaii. Was it all appropriately spent? Her office and others are going to be looking at that. So I'm sure we'll have her on again in the future. On Friday, we're going to be talking to the governor. He made some news, of course, yesterday saying that safe travels is going away, but masks are staying on indoors. We'll talk to him more about what led to that decision. Also, he has the responsibility in April of appointing the person who will replace Ty Cullen. So we'll ask him about that as well.
Yeah, a lot to catch up with Governor Ige on. So we hope that you'll join us right back here on Friday at 10:30 for another episode of Spotlight Hawaii. Until then, take care and aloha.
Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Longstrugs and Beachside Roofing.